Okay, so it's the time, so let's get started. Welcome to KUDH 2021. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for participation. I'm Somiyagawa, an assistant professor in digital humanities at Kyoto University. Today we have the last day of KUDH Kyoto University Digital Humanities or Digitalization Hub for humanities and cognitive and social sciences. KUDH International Conference 2021, Digital Transformation in the Humanities at Kyoto University, but held online via Zoom. As we saw on the last 2 days, digital humanities DH is an interdisciplinary research field that uses digital technology to preserve, exhibit, analyze, and educate about cultural resources and humanities materials. The innovative hub of humanities, the Graduate School of Letters, Kyoto University, is pleased to announce the holding of an international online conference with 3 DH researchers from Kyoto University and 7 international DH scholars from the Czechia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The fields covered digital corpora, character encoding, and digital curation. The covered cultures include East Asia, Western Antiquity, Ancient Egypt, Ancient India, and Ancient Maya. All research presentations will be online for those who can't make it. Sorry, I have to share my screens first. Wait a minute. For those who can't make it, we will also provide recordings. All right. This is the image, sorry, not this one, the Methodological Commons by Willard McCarthy and Harold Short. This is often used to explain the common ground of methodologies in digital humanities. So the topic is digital corpora and universal dependencies. So the disciplinary fields are mainly linguistics and computer science. However, from the point of view of digital humanities, both have the methodological common ground. The methodologies such as annotation, automation, and visualization are shared with various disciplinary groups, including today's topics. When we dissect the methodology, we can see shared elements as the so-called scholarly primitives, basic functions common to scholarly activity across disciplines. John Answorth listed scholarly primitives, discovering, annotating, comparing, referring, sampling, illustrating, representing. We share the common methodological ground and scholarly primitives among various disciplinary fields using digital tools and methods. So now we hold a conference to cover various disciplinary fields in digital humanities under the title of Digital Transformation in the Humanities, the KUDH Kyoto University Digitalization Hub of the Humanities, Social and Cognitive Sciences. And yeah, this event is hosted by the Innovative Hub for Interhumanities, Center for Studies of Cultural Heritage and Interhumanities, Graduate School of Letters, Kyoto University. Now here are the greetings from Professor Chigusa Kita, the director of the Innovative Hub for the Humanities, Interhumanities. Professor Kita.
Okay, thank you for joining the last day of this conference from all over the world. I will explain briefly about our innovative hub of humanities. It is a part of the Center of Studies and Cultural Heritage and Interhumanities, which was established in April 2019 as a result of the merger between 2 centers, one of which was the Center for Eurasian Cultural Studies, which had played a pivotal role in Asian studies since 1966. And the other was the Center for Cultural Heritage Studies, had conducted numerous archaeological activities within the Kyoto University campus. The brand new center takes up the mission of integration of humanities, and our innovative hub has recently been designed for promotion and diffusion of interdepartmental research activities and digital research methods within the Graduate School of Letters. almost a year ago, we opened a position for an assistant professor with a command of digital humanities research technologies. So Miyagawa applied to it with a dream of organizing this kind of international conference. We are delighted to hold this stimulating conference owing to So's passion and effort. And now we can open the final day of the conference today with prominent speakers and audience from various regions and within Kyoto University, of course. Thank you, So. Let's start the sessions of the day 3.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kita. Thank you so much, Kita Sensei. Okay, let's start it. So the final day. So we have the 3 speakers, and this is actually the continuation of the first day, data corpus and universal dependencies. We had presentations by Amizedes and Koichi Yasuoka. From Amiya, we had great presentation about the UD tree banking for Coptic. And from Koichi Yasuoka Sensei, we had a great presentation on universal dependencies for classical Chinese or Japanese and Ainu. And today we have speakers who are very experts of universal dependencies, especially the first speaker, Daniel Zeman. He's belonging to the Institute of Formal and Applied Linguistics at Charles University, Czech Republic, Faculty of Mathematics and Physics. And he is very famous for developing universal dependencies, and he is continuously updating almost all the corpora. I'm not sure, but very many corpora of universal dependencies. And he is also a chief investigator of UD pipe. I think it is very well used. UD universal universal dependency tree banking parser, provided by the Charles University in Prague. And his talk is about universal dependencies, comparing languages in space and time. And last 2 speakers are Kyoko Amano and Giuseppe Cirano. Kyoko Amano will talk about the historical background of the formation of the Veda in ancient India, as deciphered from the visualization of the inference relations among the Vedic texts. And the last talk will be Giuseppe Cirano's UD potential and limitations. Both talks will be very, very interesting. Kyoko will cover Vedic corpus building, and she will also talk about the universal dependencies for Sanskrit and Vedic, I heard. And Giuseppe Cirano, he is principal investigator of Arethusa, which is the editor of universal dependencies annotation for Latin and Greek. Both presentations will be very, very, very interesting. And then, we will conclude the conference. And we will also provide the videos later to all the participants who registered, and we will also put the videos on our official online platform of the Kyoto University. We will also notify you when it is ready. And what should I do? What should I say? Then today we will have various talks about digital corpus and syntactic annotation through universal dependencies, basic corpus language comparison through UD, potential limitations of UD. I didn't hear so detail of their presentations, but I think Kyoko and Giuseppe will talk about all the Indo-European corpus and universal dependencies annotations. Okay, so we have just 1 minute. Wait a minute. Okay, then I will pass the button to Danzeman. Danzeman, as I introduced, Danzeman is are you a professor or you're?
I'm a senior researcher.
Okay.
And lecturer, but not professor formally.
Okay. I see. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, he's very, very famous for universal dependencies development. And today he will talk about the universal dependencies. It's very, very exciting. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So yeah, then now the floor is yours. So yeah, please start your presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope the sharing is now okay and you see my slides.
Yes.
Just a minor correction to the introduction. I'm actually not responsible for the UD pipe tool, but it's my colleague Milan Straka, but nevertheless, I will be talking about it as well. So we've heard in the previous days of the conference several mentions of the Universal Dependencies or UD project. And today I will take a broader perspective of that project and will also show you various details of the project itself. So the outline of what I want to speak about is first I will spend some time on introducing universal dependencies, showing you some details of how it's organized. Then I will briefly look at parsing UD using automatically trained models. I will mention the natural language processing shared tasks that were focused on that. And I will obviously spend some time in hinting how such data can be used in digital humanities. I will look at parallel tree banks and language change. As for the item number 6, I have some extra slides, but I don't think we will be able to squeeze them in this time slot. But if there is time during the discussion, we may get to enhanced universal dependencies as well. So what is UD? Universal dependencies is basically two kinds of things. It's a set of annotation guidelines with obviously some underlying linguistic theory. And it's also a set of corpora or tree banks annotated according to those guidelines. And the main motivation behind UD is that we wanted to have one set of guidelines that would be applicable to all the languages of the world, at least all the nature languages. And it could be applied in such a way that same thing would be annotated the same way across the languages. But there's obviously some balance to be found here, because we don't want to make all the languages look the same. We want actually to be able to highlight how they differ. What are the different coding strategies that languages use to express the same kind of meaning? So it is not always easy to define to what extent something is the same thing in two different languages, because the languages are different, the grammatical devices are different there. So at some point we have to say, no, this is no longer the same thing. It is actually something different, even though it doesn't exist exactly in the same form in the previous language. So we want to have actually some slightly different annotation to show, to express that it's different. So some compromise has to be always found. Here is a brief overview of the history of the project. So we are now more than 7 years around, and even we had a first kickoff meeting in the middle of 2014, but even that was not actually the start of everything from scratch. There were similar initiatives similar to UD even before that date, which gradually merged into one big community effort. So by January 2015, we had the first data release and the first set of guidelines. It was just 10 tree banks for 10 languages that time, but even in the May of the same year, we already had a second release, and since then we basically tried to have a new release of data every 6 months, which makes it first easy for people who want to work on a new language to like jump on the train and have their data published. And at the same time, it's possible to relatively quickly fix bugs that potentially are found in the previously released data. So we have like 2 releases a year, mostly in May and November, even though some of them have been shifted because of various reasons. By the end of 2016, we had a second version of the guidelines, version 2, and we are working with that since then. And in 2017, we had the first UD workshop collocated with the conference, and since then we had a UD workshop every year. In 2017, there was also the first Connell shared task, which means common, like a conference collocated task for various teams from various universities, where they had the same set of data from UD, and they tried to build parsers for as good as possible for that data set, and then it was evaluated with the common test bed and the results published. And the last release was this year in May, where we had already 202 tree banks for 114 different languages, and it is still growing. So in less than a month from now, we are expecting another release, and I'm pretty confident that again we will have samples of new languages there. So this is the current picture in terms of languages. We are still heavily biased towards the Indo-European languages, so that's probably not surprising, because many of those languages are have big data sets and research teams behind them. But it's gradually getting more varied, and we have as of now, we have, I think, around 20 language families represented in UD. So the bias is gradually made lower and lower. So now let's have a look at what UD is. So the basic design principles, obviously the first principle is dependency. It's not the only way how you could represent formally the syntax of a natural language, but it has been widely used in at least practical NLP systems. And by the way, UD, even though it's now used in linguistics and various other fields, it was the community originally around people from the natural language processing field. So there were already tree banks that were used for training automatic parsers in NLP before UD, and many of them were based on dependencies. So there was one practical reason why dependency was selected as the main principle to represent syntax. And the new added value was actually to try to find out a way how dependencies could be made the same or similar for other languages, because there was a main obstacle for the pre-UD tree banks, that each of them was designed differently for each language. You had a different framework, or even within one language you could have multiple annotation schemes. So that was the effort in UD to unify this. The second underlying principle is what we call lexicalism, which can be translated as a subscription to the word as the basic unit for annotations, unlike smaller units like morphemes, or larger units like multi-word expressions. So words have morphological properties if the language has morphology, and words enter into the syntactic dependency relations. But obviously, this does not solve everything, because there is the question, what actually is a word? And I think especially for speakers of Japanese, I don't have to explain why this is a problem. So sometimes you have to define somehow where exactly the word boundary is. And even in languages that have orthographic words with spaces and punctuation delimiting the strings that could be defined as words, sometimes you actually have to say that one orthographic word may correspond to multiple syntactic words, because there are units that really are not just morphemes, they do behave syntactically independently. We will see some examples of that. Finally, an important, even though different from the previous two, an important principle is recoverability. We want the mapping, especially the mapping of the orthographic words to the syntactic units to be visible, and so that we are able to train models that will recover that and maybe learn how to segment words in new languages. So we don't want to only show the syntactic annotation, but also everything else, what we did to the original text. Now, if I say we want to annotate the same thing the same way, here's the first example, a very simple one, what it possibly could mean. So here is a simple English sentence. George killed the dragon, just a verb and the subject, George, and the object, the dragon, and then there is a link of the determiner to the noun, and that's it. And there are part of speech tags and so on. So now if I have the same sentence in Irish, Vara, George, and Dragon, you can see that the word order has changed. Now the verb comes the first, and then there is George as the subject and the dragon as the object. But otherwise, it's pretty much parallel to English. So there is the same or isomorphic tree structure. Again, there is a subject, object, and the determiner. Let's look at, say, Spanish. Jorge mató al dragón. Here we already have one slight problem because we don't know what to do with this word al. And that's an example of what I was talking about and saying syntactic words don't necessarily match the orthographic words, because al in Spanish is in fact a contraction of a preposition a and the determiner el. So, and those words exist elsewhere in the language separately, independently. But in this particular case, they are contracted into one word orthographically and also in pronunciation. So what we do in UD to do justice to this, we say that in this case, it actually corresponds to two syntactic words that have their own nodes in the tree structure, a and el. But remember, we have, it's not visible directly here, but we have the mapping there. So in the annotation, you can still see that on the surface, it was al. So we can train a model that will learn how to do this segmentation automatically. Otherwise, it's again parallel, just the preposition is an extra word here because it was not needed in neither English nor Irish, but the rest is parallel. And my final example on this slide is Czech, Draka zabil Jiří. Here again, we have a different word order. We don't have any determiner. It's not needed in Czech. We don't have the preposition. It's not needed in Czech, but we have the basic backbone structure, the verb, the subject, and the object. Now, you may think by now that when I say the same thing should be annotated the same way, that same thing actually is the same meaning. It's not the case. Here is another set of examples. Now, all of them in English. And so the first one is very similar to the previous slide. He killed the dragon. That's an active sentence. We could passivize the sentence. We could say the dragon was killed by him. The meaning is the same, but it has changed syntactically. And UD, even though looking like something that prefers semantics, it's actually still a syntactic framework. So it tries to show if syntax differs. So here we have a different syntactic construction, and that's why we also have a different tree structure. It looks similar, well, but at least the labels of the dependencies are different. So now the dragon is the subject, although we have this subtype here, which says that it's a passive subject, and it helps the language applications to decipher the actual mapping to the semantic rows, but still it is a subject, while he was the subject in the active sentence. And we could have, let's say, nominalization, his killing of the dragon. It's not a complete sentence, but at least this part, again, semantically corresponds to the previous examples. But again, it's nominalization, it's syntactically different. So that's why we also have quite different labels for the dependencies. And you could have a relative clause, the dragon that was killed. And again, there's different structure with different dependency labels. So this also means that sometimes you will have different annotation across language boundaries, because maybe the construction that's used in the other language is syntactically quite different from the construction in English or whatever is your first language. So here is an example of that. This is Sanskrit, Raja Vishnu Sharmanam Ahoya Pravacha, and that's a construction that's very frequent in Sanskrit and many other languages, Indian languages and others as well, where essentially this verb form is something that has common properties of a verb and an adverb. So it makes this clause something like an adverbial clause that is clearly not in a finite form, and it modifies the main clause syntactically. So that's why this ADVCL is here. It means adverbial clause. And so you could translate it literally like having someone Vishnu Sharma, the king said, and then there would be something more, what he said. Now, these constructions are routinely translated to English using coordination. So it is quite likely that in English, you would see the translation, the king summoned Vishnu Sharma and said something. But just because it's translated as coordination doesn't mean that we should annotate it as coordination in Sanskrit, because the constructions are different. So this also demonstrates that translation to another language might sometimes be misleading. It is useful to see translations, but it's not the ultimate decision about what behaves there. So what happens there? So we have to look at the syntactic working of the system in the language which we are annotating. So that was the introductory examples. I will have now a little bit more detailed tour through the universal dependencies annotation framework. So there are multiple levels of annotation, or essentially there are two, plus the word segmentation. So once we have done word segmentation, we have morphology, and then we have syntax. So here is a Czech example of morphology. The sentence, některé dívky se nicméně pochvalovaly zmrzlinu, meaning some girls nevertheless praised the ice cream. And at the morphological level, we have a lemma for every word. So there is that's the basic or citation form, and you can see that některé is lemmatized to některý, dívky to dívka, and so on. Then we have a part of speech tag, coarse grain category of each word, and then we may have morphological features, which are essentially feature value or attribute value pairs. And there might be multiple features for each word, or maybe no features at all if the word if there's nothing to say extra about the word, and so on. So as for the part of speech tags, we have this repertory of 17 coarse-grained categories, and it cannot be extended for any language. So it is assumed that every language should be reasonably happy with this. It doesn't mean that every language has to use all of them, but at least every word in every language should have a category among these 17 classes. If some extra distinction is needed in a language, then we should use features. So features also have a predefined set of labels. These 24, these are actually feature names. So each of them has a set of predefined values, which I'm not showing here. These are predefined because they are attested in multiple languages, and we obviously wanted to document as much as possible so that people use them the same way in all the languages as much as possible. But unlike the part of speech tags, these can be extended. So if you believe that you need extra features for your language, or maybe just extra values of the existing features, you can define them in the language-specific documentation. Now, as for the syntactic annotation, we have again some examples that we are showing repeatedly in all the UD talks. So the usual example that we repeat is the dog was chased by the cat. And now you can show translations to multiple sentences, multiple languages, sorry, and demonstrate how it differs depending on what means the language uses to express various shades of grammatical meaning. So you can see that the backbone here, again, as in the dragon example previously, the backbone is quite parallel. The lower example, by the way, is Bulgarian. Kucheto se presledva kotkata. And you can see that there is this dog is the passive subject in both languages, and cat is the oblique expression for the agent of the action, the cat, in both languages. So those are the blue dependencies, and then the black one is a technical relation that connects the final punctuation to the head of the clause, and that's also parallel. But that's not so interesting. The blue ones are. Now, there are also some function words, and those differ quite substantially across languages. So here, for instance, we have the definite article in English, the dog, the cat. But in Bulgarian, you have definiteness, but it's not expressed as a separate function word. Instead, it's a suffix directly on the noun. So kucheto, the suffix to, is responsible for the definite reading. So here we have the morphological feature definite def on the function word in English, and we have it on a noun in Bulgarian. And we also attach the determiner as low in the tree as possible as the leaf node to the dog, so that we preserve the parallelism of the blue relations as much as possible. Because if the function word was somewhere higher in the tree, it would distort the structure of the main content words. So that's why the red relations here are of a different nature than the blue ones. That's also something that makes UD quite different from other dependency frameworks, and it has been criticized, but the misunderstanding here is that UD has a different goal here. So you should read the red links as connection of various grammatical words together in what Lucien Tenier would call the nucleus, and the function word in one language may actually correspond to morphology in another language, or maybe to nothing at all. We see that there is also this preposition. It's the same thing. It's also a function word, but we have it both in English and in Bulgarian. We could have a different Bulgarian example for the same meaning. We could have kucheto beše presledvano od kotkata, which would be more parallel to English, while the se in the previous example is not an auxiliary verb. It's rather a reflexive marker that has been grammaticalized to expressing the passive. Okay, so I have another example for this. I have a translation to Czech, and here we can see that the definiteness has disappeared completely because it's not necessary to express definiteness in Czech. So it's not even marked on the noun. Pes is the dog, but it could also be a dog. And similarly, cat is kočka, but it's either the cat or a cat, and it's not expressed here. We have the auxiliary as in English, but we don't even have the preposition for the oblique agent modifier. Instead, there is morphological device that changed the basic form kočka to kočkou, which is labeled as the instrumental case form. And that's the morphological device that tells you that this should be understood as the oblique agent of the verb to chase. So again, something that's a function word in one language corresponds to a morphology in another language. So that was the very quick introduction to how UD looks like. By the way, I didn't show you the whole taxonomy of the various dependency relations that we have because we don't have so much time, but again, the relations can be extended, and while the extension like passive is a subtype, passive is something that will be attested in many languages, there again can be language specific extensions. So only the part before the colon is defined universally, but you can come up with extensions if you need them, and then they have to be defined as a subtype of something that's predefined in the main UD taxonomy. Okay, so the second section that I want to cover is how can UD be used for automatic parsing? As I said, it was the origins of UD are in the natural language processing community. So parsing was actually the original main goal. And it essentially means that you want to use machine learning to train a model on the training part of the UD tree bank. So it also means that not all the languages that we have in UD can be used this way. Some of the tree banks we have are very small, so you cannot train anything meaningful on them. But the majority are actually large enough. And by large enough, I mean at least tens of thousands of words, so that you can train a parser and then you apply it to new data and you obtain annotations, which are not manually corrected, but still usually are good enough to work with them. And in the recent years, the standard has become that the parsers work so-called end-to-end, meaning that you really use just raw text as the input, and the system does everything. So it does the sentence segmentation, tokenization, or word segmentation. It does the morphological analysis, so it predicts the lemmas, part of speech tags, and features. And finally, it does the syntactic analysis. So it tells you where the relations are and what their labels are. Now, obviously, we want to be able to evaluate the parsers, how good they are. And it is not so easy if the parser works end-to-end, because first of all, we have to align the system-produced words to the gold standard words. And only if they can be aligned, then we can also judge whether the morphology for them and the syntax for them has been predicted correctly. So if you create a wrong word boundary, then you have a word that cannot be compared to the manually annotated gold standard, and you will not get any point in the score for that. So I want to show you some examples of the performance scores, just a tiny sample so that you can imagine what it means. It comes from the two big tasks in UD parsing that were organized as part of the Cornell as part of the Cornell conference in 2017 and 2018. So the results are from 2018. I would encourage you, if you are interested in that, to look at the website of the shared task, where you will find many more various metrics. So one example I have is on the Czech tree bank. It's one of the largest tree banks in UD, so actually it's there's a lot of data to train on, and the combined overall score is 85%, which doesn't sound extremely good because there's still like 15% of errors, but you have to think about it as a combined score where you really get a point for a word as correct if you get everything correct for that word. So morphology has to be correct, all the features, and also all the function words that belong to it have to be correct. So if we look at the individual subtasks, we will find out that sentence segmentation is 93% correct for Czech. So sometimes the sentence boundary was wrong, but it's not so devastating because it means there will be at least one dependency link incorrect, but otherwise morphology could be still quite okay. But word segmentation is almost perfect. It's almost 100%. So that's not a problem in Czech. And that also means that all the other things, the scores show really the difficulty of that subtask itself. So lemmatization is almost 99%, part of speech tagging is 99%, feature values are slightly worse, it's 96, almost 97%, and the label dependency relations, that's the most difficult part, the syntax, so it's only 90%, but still it's better than 85. But since for the combined score, you only get a point if everything is correct for a word, then obviously it's lower. Now, I have another example for Japanese. This is again the best system in the chat task, that the best for Japanese was this HIT from China. And here the combined score is worse than in Czech. It's smaller data set, but also, as you could guess, the problem with Japanese is that word segmentation is not so easy as for Czech. So it's actually the best word segmentation in that shared task for Japanese was 94%, 94.5%. Most of the other systems had only 90%. And it also means that none of the other subtasks can be better than this, because if the word cannot be aligned to its gold standard counterpart, then you cannot get the correct point for it. So lemmatization is only 93, and part of speech tagging also almost 93, and feature values are quite okay. I guess it might be because there are not many features in the data set. And label dependency relations are 83%, but altogether combined, you get only as high as 72. Finally, I also wanted to show you the best result for English, which was 76, the combined score. And you should bear in mind that this is actually a bit outdated because there are new parsing models every year, but I'm still showing this shared task because we have this comprehensive picture of all the languages. But in the meantime, there were new developments in the neural network modeling, and especially the large language models like BERT, which we have heard about from Amir 2 weeks ago. So these numbers would actually currently be larger than you see here. A good news from the shared task also is that some of the parsers, some of the systems that participated there, are actually available not just as research projects where typically you will have to do a lot of engineering work to make it actually run, but some of them are really available as maintained off-the-shelf tools with pre-trained models that you can use even without much knowledge of computer science or machine learning. So there might be more than this, but these two are quite popular. As we mentioned, UDPipe has been developed by my colleague from Prague, Milan Straka, which is you can either download it and use it in command line on your own computer, or it's even available as a web-based service. So if you follow this link, you will find a service where you can use one of the pre-trained models and just copy and paste your text there. And if it's in one of those languages that are available in UD, then you will get instantly its parsed version, and you can download the output or just visualize the trees. And Stanza, based on the Stanford system from the shared task, again, it's another tool that you can download and use, and many people do so. So now this brings me finally to how can we possibly use this in digital humanities. So it turns out that a resource like UD is quite useful in various areas. So obviously the first one is that linguists can search the tree banks and create sophisticated queries like this one, where I'm asking for a node that is a verb, and it has a child node which is labeled as oblique argument, and it is in the instrumental case. So obviously this makes sense for languages that have morphology and cases, and one of the cases is labeled instrumental, but still it's relatively language independent. So you could still, for instance, apply this to any Slavic language. And then we are also asking that this oblique argument in instrumental case has no preposition attached to it, which is this last part of the query. And I've applied it on this picture to the Slovak tree bank, and I got this result. And there's like obviously 100 other results, and there's probably more than that because the service just shows you the first 100 results if there's more. Now, some tree banks are relatively small, so the linguists may not be satisfied with just a few examples that they find in that limited data set, because there was no manpower to create more annotated data. But thanks to the automatic parsers that we have even available as web services, the linguists can actually take whatever data they want to analyze, like a Wikipedia article, and copy it to the parser and get instantly the annotations of the sentences. So I did this with the COVID-19 web page, wiki page in Czech. And obviously I could do it with many other translations for which we have UD models as well. It is also useful for language learning, so you can check how the grammar is used on real examples in the corpus, again by using search engines or automatic parsers. And we actually have some learner corpora as well in UD. So corpora where the annotated material is essays written by people who learn the language as their foreign language. So we have that for Chinese and English as a second language, and I think Italian as well. And there is a Czech learner corpus also, even though it's not yet released in UD. So those are obviously data full of errors, but they are interesting for people who design teaching methods for foreign languages because they can analyze the errors that the students typically make. Now, we also have a large and growing collection of classical or historical languages and language varieties in UD. This personally was quite a surprise to me, actually, that we attracted such a large number of people who want to analyze classical languages. So almost from the beginning, we had Latin and ancient Greek, but it's gradually growing. So we now have Old Turkish as well, classical Chinese, Sanskrit, Akkadian, Coptic, as you know already, and Old French, Gothic, Old Church Slavonic, and Old East Slavic. So, and I know others are in the works as well. So there will be probably Hittite in the future and Old Irish as well. Another branch is documentation of endangered languages. So those are languages that are spoken by various small ethnic groups in various parts of the world. Most of these languages are not written at all or very rarely written. So the data comes from field work by linguists. But obviously documentation of such languages is quite an important task because it's like preserving the cultural heritage. And again, these people found it quite useful that they can reuse the infrastructure that we have prepared in UD, so they don't have to think too much about the annotation guidelines and the tools to use because it's ready. So they just plug in their own knowledge of the language and they use it. Finally, UD is obviously quite a useful tool for linguistic typology. So you can study things like, say, word order in various languages of the world. So this picture is actually taken from the Word Atlas of Language Structures. So it's not UD, and it's based on reference grammars for various languages. And this particular picture demonstrates the word order, whether a language prefers to have the object before the verb, which are the blue dots, or after the verb, which are the red dots, or there is no dominant verb object word order like this gray dot for German and Dutch here. So this is these are colored representations based on reference grammars, but thanks to UD, we can now quantify studies like this. So we can really look at the actual data from the languages, and we can count how many times there was a relation going right to left or left to right, or some particular morphological feature or whatever. So the diagram here, the chart that I have here is actually a study that we conducted recently, and that does something very similar to the previous map from the walls. It counts how many times or what percentage of the relations of dependence of verb go right to left as opposed to left to right. So the verb is on the right and the dependent is on the left. And if you were able to read the language codes at the bottom here, which you probably are not able, you would see that it confirms what the literature would say about various languages. So here, close to the 100% of right to left dependencies on the verb, we have Korean, Tamil, Telugu, and Japanese, Turkish, and then it gradually decreases. And on the opposite end, we have the Celtic languages and Arabic. And you can also see that the similar colors which encode the same language family or language genus are often clustered around the same part of the table. So, so that's sort of also confirms what we would have hypothesized. We have parallel data in UD. That's another thing that we can compare even the constructions in the same sentence or semantically the same meaning across languages. So we have some what we call PUD, parallel universal dependencies, and that's Newswire and Wikipedia texts for I think 20 or around 20 modern languages. But then we also have Bible in several classical languages, not only classical, but several languages we have excerpts from the Bible, and that's also parallel. So we can, like here, we can see the same sentence in ancient Greek. That's from the New Testament, from Mark 5:36, and we can look at the same sentence in Latin, and we see that it's quite different actually, syntactically and also lexically. And we can have the same sentence in Gothic or in Old Church Slavonic. And even I think we have Coptic. I have actually two versions of that, depending on whether you do or do not segment the glitics. And we probably have that same sentence in a few other languages, I believe, because we have Bible in Romanian as well, and Yoruba, and maybe others. So that's like looking at parallel languages, parallel annotations is one thing. The other thing is that we can also observe the language change. So even though we don't really have parallel texts in older version of the language and then a newer version, we could actually have that for the Bible, for instance, but there's not much data like that. We still have tree banks for various historical stages of what you could perceive as one change or one chain of languages. So for instance, we have classical Latin and medieval Latin and old French and modern French, and you could observe how the language changes. And instead of modern French, you could look at other Romance languages like Catalan, Spanish, Galician, Portuguese, Italian, or Romanian, because all of them are represented in UD. Similarly, we could look at Old Church Slavonic and then Old East Slavic, which is the predecessor of Russian and Ukrainian and Belarusian. Or you could look at the other Slavic languages, and we actually have almost all of them represented in UD, including the endangered Upper Sorbian here in Germany. So only a few of them are missing. Macedonian is still missing, Bosnian is missing, Russian and Kashubian. So here is my one example of what phenomena we might want to study when looking at language change. And I take it from the Slavic language group because that's the most where I feel most at home. I'm looking at something which in Slavic linguistics is usually called the L participle. It's a verbal form or participle because it has some properties of nominals as well. And it's called L participle because the suffix which characterizes it usually has the letter L in it. It's either L or la, lo, li. And the first two examples that I have are from modern East Slavic, from modern Russian, where the highlighted form is the L participle. So prishla, chatel. And this participle is mostly associated with the past tense or something similar, and sometimes with conditional modality. So those are exactly the two examples here. Ana prišla k němu, she came to him. This is the past tense. And I would like to thank someone for something. Já chtěl by poblagodarit. So it is distinguished by the auxiliary by here, which tells you is conditional, and without the auxiliary, it's the past tense. So because there's no auxiliary verb at all, it is actually perceived in Russian and Ukrainian and Belarusian as more or less finite form of the verb, because together with the pronoun, it tells you the person and everything that you need to know. That's the full sentence. Now, if we look at West Slavic languages, they are a little bit more conservative when we look in the history, because they still use the auxiliary at least for first and second person. So that also makes it more justified to call this a participle verb form part, which means it is a non-finite verbal form. But the auxiliary is not used with third person. So if you say přišel si nás zabít, you have come to kill us. While if I just say přišel nás zabít without the auxiliary, then implicitly it means it's third person. So he came to kill us, and it's the past tense. The past tense reading is the only possible here. But if we put the auxiliary by, as we saw it in Russian, then it would be conditional. So again, and then it doesn't have to be in the past. So přišel by nás zabít means he would come to kill us. Now, if we look at another language, Slovenian, which is from the South Slavic branch, there are two differences. And again, I would perceive them as something going deeper in the history. So the Slovenian being even more conservative here. One difference is that even in the third person, there is this auxiliary. Přišel je do ugorotite. So he has come to conclusion. And the more important difference is that Slovenian also uses this participle for future tense. So it's not just past tense. Daleč boste prišli, there's a different auxiliary, and it means you will have come. So even though it's still prišli, prišel in all the languages similar, the grammatical interpretation slightly shifts all the time. And finally, which probably will explain the at least partially the Slovenian reading, in the Old Church Slavic, it is no longer just past tense. It is rather something like a perfect or resultative aspect and conditional. Again, we have the conditional meaning as the other possibility, but in the prišel example here, prišel je si pogubit nás, it will be annotated as a special aspect reading, but not necessarily past tense. So if you think of English, you can say you have come to kill us, but you could also say in future you will have come to kill us. So the future perfect could explain why it developed in Slovenian to also the future reading and not just the past tense reading. So that's all I have. I will stop and summarize at this point. I would conclude that over the last 7 years, UD has become quite popular in computational linguistics and also in general linguistics, and the success actually quite surpassed what we originally expected, because originally it was just a small effort within the NLP community. We now have annotated data for languages for which I would not think it would ever be possible, like the Tupian languages of Brazil or many of the classical languages. And it's all thanks to the common annotation scheme for typologically diverse languages that people can just come and grab and use. It makes easier both the processing, automatic processing, parsers, and searching in search engines. So all this together makes cross-linguistic studies possible. I would like to thank all the marvelous people who are part of this UD community, which is growing all the time. And without all these people, it will literally not be possible to have anything like this. So big thank you to all of them. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's a wonderful presentation from the introductory to universal dependencies to advanced level. I'm very amazed at how vivid the universal dependency shows the frequency or tendency of BO or OV languages. It's so vivid and very quantifiable. I'm so so impressed by that. So we have 11 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? If so, please raise your hands or just unmute yourself. I think there are some universal dependencies experts here. Also, very questions, very basic questions are also very welcomed. Okay, so I want to take my privilege to this chair, Session Chair. I have one question about the linguistic research using universal dependencies. I know the size of the corpora are very different one by one, and some corpora have much more training data and the others less training data and so on. Also, you use all the corpora use UPOS, universal part of speech tags, but probably there are some minute differences of usage. How do you manage with that? I think this is a big question, but do you have a kind of recommendation to perform such a research using universal dependencies?
Thank you. This is a great question, and it actually tackles something that is still an open question, I would say, in UD, because we made this big step in the beginning that we formally have one set of guidelines and one set of labels, but the much more longer run is to find all the details and describe all the details that will make the actual application of those labels to all the languages as consistent as possible. And this is difficult, obviously, because we would need one person who would understand all the languages and would write all the details for every language to make it consistent. And that obviously is not possible. And we cannot preview all the possibilities that will arise in the languages. So there are discussions on UD is based, the project is based on GitHub, so there is a discussion fora called issues. So we have discussions there, like should this be still an adjective or should we better call it a noun because blah blah blah, depending on various examples and context there. So it's I admit that there you will find inconsistencies in this when you look at various languages, and the only thing we can do is we try to find out such inconsistencies and discuss with those people and then document it as properly as possible. And that brings me to the actual answer to your question. As a linguist, you should be careful and be aware that sometimes things may not be as unified as you might initially expect. Because, for instance, as I just showed with the Slavic example of that L participle, it is obvious that there will be some conflict because it's used differently, even though it's originally the same thing. So it will be a past tense in many languages, but it will sometimes be the conditional mood. And sometimes in Slovenian, it will be even a future tense. So it will probably have different labels. But then the question is whether the past tense, the very label past, should be part of the annotation or not, since the participle is not always just in past tense. So that should be at least documented in the language-specific guidelines. But it means that you still have to pay attention to the documentation. Right? It doesn't mean that if you saw similar things annotated as past tense in Russian, you will necessarily find the same label in all the other Slavic languages. And that I could generalize this to everything, including the part of speech tags.
Right. Yeah. Also, with this kind of similar labeling probably we will develop the comparative syntax, like comparative syntax of Proto-Slavic or Proto-Indo-European can be possible with in a quantifiable way with UD, I think. But are there such research so far, done so far?
I think it should be possible. Frankly, I'm not aware of any study directly in the Slavic languages for this. But it should be quite possible, and I would be definitely interested in seeing such research, being a Slavic speaker, obviously, and I hope that we will have more historical stages of the languages as well, because so far I have just shown you the languages that have their own ISO code, so that essentially puts Old Slavic, Old Czech Slavonic and Old East Slavic as separate languages. But other languages obviously have their historical stages as well. So we, for instance, we have Old Czech, various stages of that actually, but it doesn't have its own ISO code. So when we have data for that, we don't have yet, but when we have annotated data for Old Czech, it will be covered by the Czech language as the label, but still it should be a different tree bank, and it should make such studies possible. Yeah.
Cool. Very promising. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
So obviously, if you find out later you have a question, you can contact me by email, and I'll be happy to answer whatever you may want to ask.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I'm also very interested about the minority languages Universal Dependencies Tree Bank. I know there are several languages who are called polysynthetic. Those languages can incorporate, for example, objects into verb, like now incorporation, or they can have very long word with so many morphemes. How do you manage with that? And do you already have such language in the corpus? Probably Ainu is one of the example, but probably North American languages have much more, like Lakota or Wichita have much more longer words.
I actually, that you mentioned Ainu, it's interesting. I think I saw a presentation about Ainu UD several years ago, but we actually never got contacted about adding that language. So I don't know who did it and whether the data exists. But anyway, we have that's a recent addition. We have Chukchi from Siberia, and we have Yupik, which is, I think this is the Siberian version, but there's it's spoken in Alaska as well, and both of them have incorporation. And so this opened up the question actually what to do with incorporation. The easy answer is just to take the whole long verb, including the incorporated stuff, as one word, and that's it. But that's not satisfiable, because it's what would be the best fit to the guidelines that we have so far. But that also means that you have just a few words, or maybe sometimes just one word in the sentence, so the syntactic structure will not show you anything. And you can describe it in the morphological features somehow, but you will not see the structure. So we recently launched discussions about what to do with how should we possibly show the internal structure inside the word, which, if you recall, I was talking about the lexicalist hypothesis in the beginning. So this would be sort of like breaking this principle. But at least I didn't have time today to show you the enhanced dependency layer in UD, but that's what has been used for Chukchi, at least as a temporary solution. That in the basic level, which I was showing you today, it is still just the simple annotation. So typically you don't see what happens with incorporated nouns, but then in the enhanced level, the incorporated noun will be represented as a separate node of the graph, and then the link to the verb will be shown as well.
Okay, thank you. Professor Yasuoka, Koichi Yasuoka, is currently working on Ainu Universal Dependency Tree Bank. He was one of our lecturers, presenters on the day one, and he showed Ainu Universal Dependencies, but probably it is very, very nice to perform linguistic typological research on polysynthetic languages using UD. It's very, very promising and I'm so excited about that. Yeah. Hey, Soka-san, do you have some remarks?
Oh, well. And they are about the contacted articles such as O Changeries O. In the universal dependencies, you divide O into other or something like that. But in some languages, it's very undecidable to divide one word into several two or several words. How do you think? How do we think about the contacted articles about other languages that is not for Latin or some European languages? Some idea do you have?
Well, I think it has to be decided on a per language basis, and then try to be as consistent as possible, at least with the related languages. So the example I showed for Spanish was relatively easy because you could demonstrate that Spanish at least has the concept of word in the orthography. And my advice always would be stick to the orthography as much as possible, and only when it seems really necessary to split something, then split it. So for instance, like in Turkish, we also have very long words, but I wouldn't split them too much just because it's similar phenomena are split in other languages. But in Spanish, it was obvious that we have this article as a separate word elsewhere, and the same for the preposition. Mm-hmm. So I know it's not easy, and especially for Chinese or Japanese, where there were no word boundaries originally, and so you have to decide somehow based on, and there are in linguistics there are various like theoretical assumptions that if you can reorder it or repeat it or replace by something, then it is or it's not an independent word. But all these heuristics typically are not 100% decisive for everything. So I know that ultimately you will have to decide some cases like manually based on the best human judgment, and then it has to be documented. So I think it's not a perfect advice I have. It's the only general approach I would take.
difficult for us in Japanese or some Chinese language.
Thank you so much, Soka Sensei. Does anyone have any last remarks or questions?
I have a very quick one. Daniel, thank you for your presentation. That was great. Now, I'm just wondering, with the Indian languages, have you incorporated the Pali language?
No, I think it's not yet there.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. But I think the corpora are now growing, and many people are also contributing to a new corpora of UD. So maybe one day.
Yeah, we'll be happy to take it when someone contributes it. But I hope it's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dan. Děkuji vám. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you very much for having me at this wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for a great presentation and the lecture. Thank you so much. So yeah, now we close the first talk because it's the time. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you have more questions or remarks, please send an email to Dan. And I think you will find it on his website. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So the next talk will be by Kyoko Amano from Kyoto University Hakubi Center for Advanced Research. Her talk will be historical background of the formation of the Veda in ancient India as deciphered from the visualization of the influence relations among the Vedic texts. She is very famous Indologist who made a very detailed annotation and also German translation of Mahithrani Samhita, which is estimated to have been composed in circa 900 BCE. But she's currently working also on the digital humanities project, especially Corpus, digital Corpus project on Vedic Sanskrit. And she recently got the Kakehi grant, and I'm also one of the members of the grant. And she's also collaborating with Oliver Helvig. He's also famous for the Corpus linguistics for Sanskrit and Vedic. Yeah, today she will talk about the Vedic, historical, as I said, historical background of the formation of the Veda in ancient India as deciphered from the visualization of the influence relations among the Vedic texts. So yeah, the floor is yours. Kyoko, do you have, you are now co-host, so please, start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
And do you see my?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's now full screen. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Kyoko Amano. The subject of my presentation is historical background of the formation of the Vedas in ancient India as deciphered from the visualization of the influential relations among the Vedic text. Today, I'll talk about the Vedas in ancient India. First, I will briefly explain what the Veda is and list out the problems and challenges Vedic studies are facing. Then I will introduce previous and ongoing studies related to digital humanities. I must say that the digital corpus for the Veda is far from complete. We do not have enough text corpus with grammatical annotation. However, there are ongoing attempts and trials for analysis. I introduce some of these studies, including trial examples of universal dependencies. And I introduce my plan of syntactic analysis using UD. The next part of my presentation do not really focus on the digital analysis, but rather on the analog one. This is a third point. I have been trying to clarify the historic layers of language and internal structure of a Vedic text called Mahithrani Samhita, which I will refer to as MS in this presentation. I have counted the number of examples of word or sentence constructions, calculated the frequency, and visualized the distribution in the text to highlight the historic layers. I have done everything by hand. Back then, I didn't know about the digital humanities method. So I introduced my previous study. And now I am developing a visualization system to showcase the influential relations among the Vedic texts based on a previous philological study, namely a mantra index as a database. This is a fourth point. With this visualization, we can observe the relationship among the text. Then comes the fifth point, data and the spatial temporal positioning. The aim of the analysis is to position the Vedic text geographically and chronologically, which has not made enough progress so far. Here, I try to link the data analysis with geographical and chronological localization. The last point highlights the aim of my study from a wider perspective, that is clarifying dynamism and diversity in Vedic society and creating new models for it. I must start by saying that I am neither a developer nor a skilled user of any digital tools or programs. So what I can talk is not about the method, but rather what will be achieved by research using digital humanities method. This is a point of my presentation today. The Vedas are the name of the religious text of the Indo-Aryan people who immigrated to South Asia, specifically Pakistan and India, since the 50th century BC. They composed these religious texts from the 15th to 5th century BC, after which they transmitted these texts orally for over 1,000 years. The tradition of writing is relatively new, having emerged in the 10th CE or later, when they began writing them down as manuscript. This is a picture of a Vedic manuscript. And Indian people immigrated into South India, here Pakistan and India. These Vedic texts do not carry details of the author, date, place, or historical event. Therefore, we cannot obtain any information about when, where, and by whom the texts were made. For this period, there are no archaeological findings that can identify the Vedic society. Even if there are any archaeological findings, there is no evidence that they are from the Indo-Aryan people. And there are no other historical materials or documents other than the Veda themselves. So we have only a few sources in the text, so to understand the geographical conditions. So we have only few examples for names of places and the people. So we can identify them from subsequent literature. So Buddhist and other texts in the later period, or also Greek writings. Thus, we have hypotheses for the localization of Vedic text. This is from Witzel tracing Vedic dialect, and we see the names of schools here. But so I have to say, it is still very rough and not backed by evidence. The Vedas include several different kinds of content in different genres and formats. They comprise hymns to praise the gods, explanations of various acts, formulas, and tools used during different rituals, and philosophical consideration of the meanings of these rituals, and manuals for the conduct of ritual programs. These components emerged over a long period of time from the 15th to 5th century BC, so roughly, and covered a large geographic area from the Indus Valley region to the Ganges plain. These Vedic texts were transmitted in the different schools or families, and each school or family transmitted its own Veda, own set of Veda. The Vedas transmitted in different families are similar, or we say that they are parallel with each other. We can compare them, then find differences and also consistencies. All Vedic texts can be positioned on a vertical axis that indicates content on the genre. They are genre, and they are related to chronology. So Sanhita is the oldest, and then Brahmana, they are genres, and Aranyaka and Upanishad philosophical text is relatively new. And the horizontal axis that indicates a family or schools, and they are related to geography. So, for example, we have Maitrayani Sanhita, my target text is the genre is Sanhita and Brahmana, and this text is what transmitted in the Maitrayaniya school. And for example, Brihat Aranyaka Upanishad is genre is Aranyaka Upanishad. Aranyaka and Upanishad, the content is philosophical text, and it is transmitted in Vajrasana in school. So we have so many, this is not all, but so roughly whole. We have so many Vedic texts, and all are so located in, so according to genre and families. So we are attempting to position the Vedic text on the axis of chronology and axis of geography. And it is very difficult without evidence, but I think we can clarify that with digital humanity method now, and we can correct and modify the hypothesis and make it more rigorous. So this is hypothesis, chronology and geography, and the development or so change of locations. It is just hypothesis. But now we want to challenge to modify, so modify and correct these hypotheses. And now I introduce previous and ongoing research related to digital humanities from the field of Vedic studies. At first, I have to say there are quite few data for annotated text corpus because of difficulty of computational analysis. The reason for the difficulty is so-called SANDI, that is sound fusion or change at word boundaries, and homonymous grammatical forms. We list up the Vedic text again, and the text colored with gray, they are already annotated. Only these, RV, LVS, so Atharva Veda, and some Brahmanas, and some Upanishads. And the colors with blue is the text. So the text we are planning, creating XML data in ongoing 6 years project. We are now processing at MS data. Oliver Helwig in Düsseldorf developed his post-tagging program. We are using this program to create text data with grammatical annotations. This program is partly manual and partly automated, but partly manual. The program helps us with grammatical analysis, but in many cases, because of the nature of Sanskrit, there are many possible grammatical forms. So this is the annotation for urdhva here. This is sentence. Here, this urdhva asya samido bhavanti. So this is a sentence, and this is annotation for urdhva, and the possible grammatical forms are so many. Nominative plural feminine, nominative dual masculine, instrumental singular neuter, nominative, vocative dual masculine, accusative dual masculine, nominative plural masculine, vocative plural masculine, vocative plural feminine, etc., etc. And we choose one and click, then we can create the annotation. This is another example for samiduo. So we have possible forms, nominative plural feminine of samidu, or samidha, nominative singular masculine of samida, etc., etc. So we choose that. Yeah, this is also so many possible forms, but the program helps us. For example, this analyze the compound. Vishuva is compound component, and Vara is another component. And that, that can be ablative singular neutral of Val and or nominative singular masculine Vara, etc., etc., etc. Okay. And we can, okay. Yeah, we can currently create the data and making, yeah, slowly but surely progress. The XML data we created, yeah, this is created, available on the digital corpus of Sanskrit website. So they can be found at this site. And Oliver Helbig, and with attempting syntactic analysis tool, he adapted universal dependencies in some text. So only small part, but he tries. The latest papers are the tree bank of Vedic Sanskrit and evaluating syntactic annotation of ancient languages. These two papers are new and for universal dependencies. And you can find the UD Sanskrit Vedic here, universal dependency tree bank, Sanskrit Vedic. This is an example from Maitrani Sanhita 251. Only this chapter is annotated with UD. And you see the UD annotation. Yeah. Okay. So for semantic analysis, Yuki Kyogoku in Leipzig is trying to clarify similarities among chapters of MS and TS. TS is so brother text, parallel text of MS. And he analyzed MS and TS using Word2Vec. This is part of our Kyoto University Spirits project, chronological and geographical features of ancient Indian literature explored by data-driven science. And this you find these analysis on this site, our project site. And so you can download the material of foregoing previous workshop. And another research, also semantic analysis of Rigveda RV is the oldest text with Word2Vec. Yuzuki Tsukagoshi of Tokyo University is currently attempting the semantic analysis. And he creates a new post-tagging, also new post-tagging program. And I expect his contribution in the future. And another project is OCR project for Devanagari, and newly by Professor Kato of Tokyo University. And he presented his paper here, so computer and humanities. I not so everything in my reference I put in the chat. This is an attempt to create a program for age estimation through morphological and syntactic analysis using neural network by Oliver Helbig. And he studied RV and AV. These are the oldest texts, so older than MS I studied, and so RV and AV using this method, and which were introduced is in his paper as a method. It's in his paper dating Sanskrit text in Indo-Germanische Forschungen, 2019. And yeah, this is slide from his presentation at our workshop 2021. Yeah, this is the age estimation graph of Rigveda RV. And this, here is the book from first book to 10th book. Rigveda includes 10 books, and from 1 to 10. And this vertical axis is time. Here is 1,100 years BC, and 900 BC. And you see the spike here, then, so you can assume this is additional part, so newly added part or something. And I think it fit previous philological study, and so it works very well. And he's currently developing the age estimation program, Clone BBM, Bayesian mixture model for chronology, using analysis of syntax in the project Helbig 2021 to 23. And now in the collaborative research by Helbig and me, 2021 to 26, a study of language layers in Vedic literature for the development of a program for dating. And now Dr. So Miyagawa, the organizer of this conference, is joining. Now I will speak about how I got the idea that the mathematical method is useful for the study of the Vedas. My focus has been the historic layers of language and the internal structure of the Maitrayani Sanhita. And I started with the translation of some chapters from the Maitrayani Sanhita, which I published in 2009. I translated these chapters because they include the oldest ritual explanation, which generally dates back to 9 or 800 BC. And while translating that text, I noticed that each chapter had its own linguistic features or style of telling. MS, so Maitrayani Sanhita, MS has approximately 50 chapters and 25 contents according to rituals. And they were not composed during the same period. But the chapters, there are old chapters to which new ones were added one after another. I examined in my paper 2016 some of stereotyped phrases used to introduce diverse opinions on ritual actions, such as the Brahmins discuss as follows, or one doesn't have to worry about that, or people say the following, or and people say also the following. And they are stereotyped phrases to introduce discussion, ritual discussion. And I examined all examples of these phrases in the first two books of the Maitrani Sanhita. The result presented the clear use of a particular choice of phrases in each chapter. And they are phrases, Brahmavadino Balanti, Mimansate, so they are different phrases. And 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, they are chapters of Maitrani Sanhita. And we see so clear so choice of phrases according to chapter. For example, 1.8 have many these phrases, and these they chose these. And 1.7 has another choices for the phrases. So clear use of particular choice of phrase in each chapter. And so some chapters use one set of phrases, whereas other chapters use another. Thus, I was convinced that each chapter has its own linguistic features. I also noticed a clear tendency for an exchange with other schools, with KSTS. KSTS are brother text of MS, parallel text of TS. And wherein some chapters had discussion in common among these schools. I marked these common discussions with red color. And red color, 1.7 have discussions in common in KS and TS. And for example, chapter 1.8 have so many discussions, but this the discussion were exclusively found in MS alone. So I hypothesized that there are several historic layers in Maitrani Sanhita, and old layers suggest that the school has few exchange. And whereas new layers suggest that the school had a lot of exchange. So we probably developing the exchanges. Following this research, I conducted many studies to highlight the differences among the historic layers. My basic idea was to make a distribution map that would quantify the number of sentences and draw a map where one line accords to one chapter, 141, 142, 143, and 144. And so the one line is one chapter, and it's quantifying the all sentences. So then we have map for 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. It's a small part, very small part of Maitrani Sanhita, but I I drew a map. And on this map, I marked the places showing certain linguistic phenomena. So the point of investigation was frequency of vocabulary or sentence construction, phrase, and so everything. And so this is example for which god play the leading role in the myth. And we see already a difference among the chapters. 1.6 has so especially many myths, and where the Prajapati, the creator god, plays the leading role. And other chapters has so few or no myths where Prajapati plays the leading role, but gods and asuras playing the leading role. So we see that differences according to gods in the myth. And this is another another research, I marked the present indicative tense to prescribe a ritual action. So to prescribe a ritual action, we have alternative indicative presence or optative or gerundive particle of obligation. Yeah, and I marked selecting the present indicative. So we see the many example for present indicative in 1.4 and 1.5. And I interpreted that 1.4 and 1.5, these chapters focused on the description of usual ritual actions because present indicative indicates usual ritual action. So optative is a prescribed ritual action for special case or with some emphasis. So 1.4 and 1.5 are present indicative, and this is also, that means they focus on the description of usual ritual action. And 1.6 did not focus on the description of usual ritual actions. I think because usual ritual actions has not been solidified yet. So because 1.6 is belong to older layer where the usual ritual actions have not been solidified. And I focus on the similarity with parallel text, KS parallel text, and that suggests, yeah. And I counted the same word in the sentence. I did everything by my hand, and over 2/3 words in the sentence are common with with KS is blue color, and the sky blue is 1/3 to 2/3, and under 1/3 it is green, and no color is no corresponding. So we see clearly the layers. So I would say 1.7, this chapter is almost copy of KS, or KS is copy of MS, but in any way, very, very similar to KS. And 1.6 is not so similar. Some discussions, some sentences are common, but not very similar. And I think now there is a tool like Tracer, text reuse detection machine. So I expect we can create such data with new digital tool, so not by hand like this. Now I want to introduce my future plan for syntactic analysis with possible indicators of linguistic layers. In Vedic prose literature, there is a type of or role of sentence that describe the result or effect of ritual actions. And these sentences have characteristic construction or are characterized with particle or adverbial modifiers, or with adverbial sentence as in followings. So eva, this is particle, and present indicative. This is typical for this type of sentence, the result of ritual action. Or eva with aorist indicates also the result of ritual action. And the other example is by, this is also particle, and the etad, this is pronoun, and in this way. And this is used with present indicative and also aorist. And these examples are with adverbial sentence, yet, I can translate so because. So because he makes this ritual action, then he get the result. It is a sentence construction. So yet a relative adverbial sentence and the main sentence. And the main sentence includes, in some cases, pronoun that, a pronoun neutral singular accusative that at that time or something. So it is adverbial. And tena or taya, this is instrumental of pronoun. Then with that he get so and so. Or without the pronominal element, but this typical type, eva plus present indicative or aorist, or by a tat plus present indicative or aorist. And there are variations according to position of tat on the taya. Tat can stand in the first position or second position in the main sentence. And this tena or taya can stand in the first or second position. So but there are variations for the type of sentences describing the result of ritual actions. And I think the choice from these alternatives can indicate linguistic layer. And so now I show you a little bit UD annotation. This is a type with this sentence, yat relative pronoun, and eva present type. So yat somewhere, this is a adverbial sentence, and pratyaksha eva, eva asmai passion alabte, the main sentence. So translate is because for soma, and the subject is omitted, but the sacrificial animal, and he captures the animal for him visibly. Pratyakshan, it's visibly. And so eva is annotated here as a discourse to the foregoing pratyakshan. And eva is normally understood as particle for emphasis on the foregoing word. So just or even or so. But so I will come back to later to this interpretation of eva. And this is another type, yat and tena, so pronominal component in the main sentence. We see that. And the typical is the verb of main sentence is omitted. So yat barhaspatiya brahmana varjasastaya, and foregoing sentence abalunde, this is a verb. He win, so he obtains. And the second sentence, the verb is omitted. Only the accusative is accusative and this pronominal component. So Brahman brilliance with it, and he obtains is omitted, and they annotate orphan. This here. And this is another type with a pronominal element tat in the main sentence in the first position. So because he offers in embers, yat is because angara, locative plural, embers, and he offers, and thereby tat, and he offers in fire and not in fire, tat na. So sorry. So yeah, this is just introduce this UD, and so we want to clarify the linguistic layers targeting this type of sentence. So this is a list. And our target is a sentence describing the result of ritual action, but not other sentences. And we want to select these sentences which characteristics, and we, for example, eva and present indicative or the eva, the aorist, then we choose, we select these sentences. So for example, soma eva asmaile to dadati is the present indicative, or rucham eva enam ajigamat aorist indicative. So some, and this is Soma. Soma put semen for him, and he has made him go shine. These are describing the effect of ritual action. And this sentence, Sabai manushan eva abhi upavartante. This sentence includes also eva and present indicative, but not describing a ritual effect of ritual action, but this is general statement. He turns only to the human thread. So eva is characteristics, yeah. Yeah, this eva only is its original function of emphasis, so that we can translate only to the human's thread. And in another sentence, soma eva smaitadati or so these sentences, the function of emphasis seems to be weakened and used as discourse marker. So I want to deepen this problem. This is actually the different annotations of eva in the article of Biagetti, Herwig, Ackermann, and Scalata lessons from Vedic tree bank. And this article reports the annotations performed by 3 annotators, annotator 1, annotator 2, and annotator 3. They are experts or students students of Sanskrit. These 1, 2, 3. And here is the example for different annotations of eva by 3 annotators. The first annotator annotates eva as discourse and to the main predicate, the aorist verb made sweet. And the second annotator annotates eva as discourse, but to the foregoing verb, salvas. Salva is all. So the translate is he made all, all the herbs for him. In the first sentence, thereby, this is the for the eva, because the eva is discourse, he mean. And the third annotator, eva as adverbial modifier, thus. So I think discourse to the foregoing word is rather the original functions. Now, what we can do with these so different interpretations. And I would suppose eva in the original meaning only, and when it is not in the sentence of effect of ritual, then this is so discourse, and the parent, so root is so parent is foregoing word, the like annotation 2 did in the previous slide. And eva in sentence describing the effect of ritual action, then eva is discourse and the parent is a main predicate, like the annotator 1 did. So we can differentiate the interpretations or functions of eva with so universal dependencies, and it can be helpful at the selection of the target analysis. And this is another problem. We saw by and the ATAT with present or aorist as our target sentence. So sentence describing the effect of ritual action. And so pranam ba eva itated present indicative, and ATAT is in this way. And va is article, and so difficult to translate. But so he calls the breath in this way, and this is effect of ritual action. And the second sentence also, Baba is a variation of Vai, and he puts the successful Brahmin's brilliance threefold for him in this way. And this is effect. And also with aorist, he has grasped the deity the previous day in this way. This is effect of ritual act, but not this sentence here. Pranam va etat pashabapari. Yeah, animals go against the breath in this way. That or how yeah, this is how. Sorry, how they catch the scent of wind in this in the lane. So this sentence includes by etat, and it looks the same construction as the sentence above, but etat is a correlation of yat that follows the main sentence. So not the this adverbial modifier, but correlation to yat. So we can translate in this way how for this sentence. And this sentence is not describing the effect of ritual in the another type, general statement. So, okay, so we can differentiate these types with UD, I think. Yeah. This is UD annotation for the both sentences. So he put a successful Brahman's brilliance threefold for him in this way. This is this etat. And that's another type, not target type, is etat in this way, but the yat sentence is so following to the main sentence. And the annotator annotates yat here as mark. Yeah, mark. I don't agree with this annotation. Sorry. I would annotate as a verbal modifier this yat, because this means how, and it is not conditional adverb. And the annotator interpret this adverbial clause as conditional, but I would annotate adnominal clause to pronoun etat. This, so we can make the annotation more precise in our new project. But I expect it is useful for the syntactic analysis. Yeah. So I would like to utilize the text corpus with UD annotation. So my other opinion is, my other opinion is, but question is how we classify or differentiate the various functions of present indicative. For example, present indicative provide various interpretations. So for example, general or prescription or effect or actual, and how we can select one of them. And so I would like to select one when I want to select the one. So how, and I want to discuss about what categories or what category we need further in the next step. So for example, further tag for this interpretation, or dependencies among sentences. If we have such things, then it can be useful. But I don't know about this yet now. So I come back to my previous study. I encountered a turning point during my study about linguistic layers, namely a 2016 study on Satra and Bharatiya culture. Satra is a non-Brahmanical ritual that is rather ascetic, and it includes esoteric elements. And Bharatiya indicates people who originally performed Satra. And there were different groups of Indo-Aryan from Rig Veda people. So there are different groups of Indo-Aryan. And this group came to South Asia earlier than Rig Veda people, these Bharatiya people. And they mingled with indigenous people in very early stage. The Satra and Bharatiya culture concept is not generally accepted, but I think that these people, these Bharatiya people played an important role in the development of Vedic ritual. And this culture was only a few among those described in the Vedic text because the Brahmins thought the Bharatiya rituals were heresy. And I examined these few descriptions of Satra Bharatiya and found that they include very rare linguistic phenomena. So I had a new insight. The linguistic differences among the chapters were possibly connected to their different cultural and social background. This means that when the linguistic layers are clarified, the cultures and the society of Vedic period will also be clarified. The difference among the chapters is quite large, and which means the MS was composed over a long time period, so 300 or 400 years, and each chapter reflects the conditions of the point in time when it was composed. So far, I have conducted this study using the analog method. However, with when the annotated text corpus is enriched, we can dramatically develop this study. And we are now making progress. I made my hypothesis for the process or internal construction of Maitrayani Sanhita that built the, this is internal construction and process of composition. And I hypothesize chapter 1.6 and 1.8 is the oldest in the early stage, for example, and 4.2 and 1.9 is new wave chapters. So from linguistic insight perspective and also several examinations. So now I want to link our ongoing study with this hypothesis. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are trying to perform a lexical analysis to measure the similarity between some chapter in MS with word to back, which is mainly Yuki Kyogoku's responsibility. And another project member, Hiroaki Natsukawa, Professor Natsukawa, he's data science expert. He conducted the dimensionality reduction of the result of the analysis. So using TSNE, T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding, and plotted the chapters of MS on a two-dimensional coordinate axis here. Yeah. And we see that the chapters standing across were so far. And we color MS16 red and 1.8 yellow. We confirm the similarity of 1.6 and 1.8 in this data. This analysis, so yeah, in this my hypothesis, 1.6, 1.8, the oldest or the in early stage, and we see the similarity of 1.6 and 1.8 in this data. And so this analysis has just begun, and so we want to develop the analysis in our new project. And we are also developing a visualization system of the, yeah. Sorry. So we introduced my hypothesis, hypothetical internal structure. And the next step is to broaden the perspective of relationship with other text and change in the relationships. And we are developing a visualization system of the influential relationships, an index based on index of mantra index that includes 90,000 mantras that appear in all Vedic literature, and with names and literature, names of literature and places. And this is a Bloomfield Vedic Concordance and its revised edition of Franceschini 2007. And this revised edition has digital data, and we use this digital data as database to analyze the relationship between text. I must explain what is mantra. A mantra is ritual formula that was recited during a ritual. Many mantras were used in Vedic rituals and were transmitted in Vedic texts for a long time. The mantras were the language the priest used in order to speak with the gods, so they were quite precious and were therefore preserved very well and remained unchanged. Some mantras appear or are quoted commonly in several texts, and which shows the close relations among these texts. And some mantras appear exclusively in a single text, which shows the independent nature of this part of text. Thus, the co-occurrence of mantras can serve as parameter for the relationship among the text. We are currently making a visualization system using relational database with SQLite. In the first step, we chose 19 important texts. These texts here, 19 important texts. And for this, we have a relationship approximately 150 sets. And we can select 2 texts from this table. Then we visualize the relationship between these 2 texts. We draw scatter plot and parallel coordinate plot. And one axis represents one text and another is another text. And we visualize the chapter structure with different colors. And I examine the relationship here between the oldest text, Rig Veda, RV, and my target text, MS, and the MS brother text, KSTS and VS. They are dated, so Rig Veda, 15th century to 12th century BC, and 9 to 7 MS KSTS, and newly in relatively new stage VS. And the relation is so mantras in RV are quoted in these texts. This is a relationship. And we examine 4 relationship RVMS, RVKS, RVTS, and RVVS. Yeah. First, we look at the relation between RV and MS. This is the vertical axis is RV and here MS. So, and this is a book from 1 to 10 Rig Veda, 1 to 10 RV, and the MS from 1 to 4. MS has 4 books and from 1 to 4. And we have close relation in some chapters and no relation in some chapters. So we can, now we can compare the relationship, 4 relationship, RVMS, RVKS, RVTS, and RVVS. So we find some resemblance of structure between KS and RV. Structure is so similar, and which indicates the same editorial policy of these texts. And we see only a few citations at the end of book in TS, TS in the last stage here, they have no so few quotation from RV. That means I assume TS has moved away from RV or had become an independent authority, so they had no contact with the RV in the latest stage. When compared to MS case TS, which showed inconsistencies in their relationship, so inconsistencies in that from the chapters, yeah, so VS has no inconsistencies. So I would say the influence from RV has in VS hardly shifted, so didn't shift it. So I think this is because of the time of composition of VS, which may have been some time after RV's vulgate spread far and wide. When MS case and TS were compiled, either RV's vulgate or all of RV were not well known. They only learned a part of RV that was necessary for the rituals they described, and they was not so when VS was comprised, as by them, Rig Veda's vulgate has spread widely. I will now focus on the Yajnavalkya chapter. Oh, sorry, this time is so. I speak quickly. Sorry. So now I will now focus on. Can I continue? No?
Yeah, sure, but we don't have so much time. But yeah,
sorry.
but in hurry, please. Be hurry.
Yeah, I'll quickly. Or I skip. Should I skip?
No problem. If you want to show, please.
Okay. Okay. I will now focus one. So the last chapter of MS. Yeah, this year, because this chapter includes most of citations from RV. So I assumed this chapter to be an additional part of Rig Veda and RV and composed in a later period. So I colored black with black these special chapters. Yajnavalkya is a special collection of hymn. So special collection for oblation recited by holy priest. And we see that RV MS has a large number. This is, yeah. So we see that clear. We select only so these special collection. So RV has this special so selection in the latest chapter, in the last chapters, and they quoted from RV1 so many, and KS and TS quoted didn't quote from RV1. So this is difference. This is the difference. So many stations for from Rig Veda 1 in MS, only in MS. And so, yeah, okay. So this is most remarkable. And now I want to link the result of the data analysis to the map. And I have a hypothesis on the localization of Vedic school when MS was composed, early period 900, and middle period 800, and the late period is the time for Vedic globalization. By Vedic globalization, I mean the status wherein the network developed and the information was shared over a wide area. So earlier, people had contact with close neighbors alone, and in the later period, they were aware of wide area. The resemblance between KS and TS indicate their location cross. Yeah, this resemblance is cross location, close neighbor with each other in this period. And RVS it indicates the status of the widespread RV brigade in the period 3, so Vedic globalization. So this is one proposal for the localization. And yeah, this is another thing. These are the close connection with between RV and MS. Is this probably reflect this cross localization. So now the last point of presentation, this is clarifying creating the new model. Yeah, and earlier man thought that the Vedic schools emerged from a single root, so branched out of the one single Brahmanical culture. However, when we clarify the different layers of Vedic text, we can construct new model for diverse cultures. So not simple from one root, but so there are several groups and influence each other. And this diverse cultural model is not based on the model from a single Brahmanical culture, but on the model for different waves of Indo-Aryan. So this new model. And when one assumes a single root and a single Brahmanical culture, and he may assume only internal development. Thus, there was an intra-social hierarchy model for social classes, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, in one social group. When we clarify the various linguistic layers from various social groups, we can create a new model that is networking society model. So from my philological study over a long period, I gradually identified the new models. And now I'm sure that language analysis using the DH method can enrich and develop this new model for a diversity of Vedic society. Yeah, sorry, it's long. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Yamano Sensei. And this is quite informative and very rich talk about the Vedic linguistics, corpus linguistics. Does anybody have any questions? So I have a kind of a small question about how do you manage with Sandhi, the fusion of words. I only know Sanskrit, but what is the current status of Sandhi word segmentation?
There are several studies for Sandhi. So Sandhi, so interpretation for Sandhi, and Oliver, I use Oliver Helbig's program that so analyzing so Sandhi, so reconstruct the original forms, and so we see that there are several possibilities, several possible grammatical forms. Yeah, so it is so.
Okay. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any last questions or remarks?
I might have one, if I may. Thanks for the great presentation. I really enjoyed that. Now, I'm curious, because you did say these texts were very, very old. What conditions were they found in? And also, were they written on paper? Was it written on paper, or what were they written on?
What is your question? What?
The texts, right? All these texts that were found, what were they written on originally?
They were transmitted orally for over 1,000 years, and then they were written down on manuscript. And we found so many manuscripts for Vedic text.
All right. Okay.
In India, yeah.
Okay, there were many. Okay, right. Now, the rituals that you talked about, were they for festivals or deaths or for home use? What were they used for, really? Was it for a god's birthday, or was it on the occasion of someone's death? What were they for? Do we know?
So some rituals are routine. So, for example, new and full moon sacrifice. So they have some meeting, or so they have ritual at every full moon, new and full moon. So I think it has social. It is important for so unifying the social so people or relatives.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And so some and there are another rituals for kings. So king showed his power. King showed his power to the people, and they performed a great ritual and showed his power or something.
Right. Thank you. Now, was there any hierarchy in the priests? Do you know that? Were the priests like, one was higher than the other?
I think so, because I think so, because they could speak to the gods. So
okay. Thank you.
Very important for the society.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, we are very behind the time. But yeah, if you have any other questions and remarks to Professor Amano, please write your questions on your chat, the chat box of the Zoom, or just email her. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Amano, for a very comprehensive and wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for the
no problem. Thank you. Very many thanks. So our last but not least, but the rather climax paper will be given by Giuseppe Cellano. Yeah, he's famous for Arethusa project and also Greek and Latin universal dependencies. He's a DFG, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft project leader, the natural language processing department of Leipzig University, and the current editor for the ancient Greek and Latin dependencies bank. Yeah, it is also Leipzig University's or Leipzig University, Tufts University project. Yeah, so his current work is computational analysis of linguistic data, especially from ancient Greek and Latin. Yeah, he's publishing so many papers on that, and he has been published so many products of ancient Greek and Latin universal dependencies, and also other digital corpus projects. So yeah, the floor is yours. Yeah, please.
I'm trying to share my screen, but I read that the host disabled.
Sorry. Yeah, I will. Yeah, sorry. Maybe the co-host. I surely made you a co-host, but maybe there's a connection, something. Yeah, I think now you can do it. Sorry.
Okay, wait a second. Okay, can you?
Yeah, I can show, but not full screen. It's currently.
Okay, wait a second, because I only have one screen, and okay. What about now?
Yeah, it's now the full screen. Yeah, looks very nice.
Okay, great. So Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to take part in this conference. So, as you can read, my presentation is going to be about a few considerations that I have developed over time while working on universal dependencies. And more specifically, I'll try to point out some, let's say, critical controversial aspects or limitations of this framework. UD, as we know, has grown more and more popular. It comprises about 203 banks, as we know, about 100 languages, and there are hundreds of contributors helping with the periodic release of the data. So the distinctive feature of UD is the common annotation scheme. So this is the biggest challenge, trying to apply the same annotation scheme to different languages, potentially to any language. And this is done while trying to provide a sound linguistic and typological analysis. And we also wanted to have fun with some machine learning. So the annotation should also be suitable for computer parsing. The novelty of the common annotation scheme, as I was saying, is evidenced by the fact that the first shared task where languages were annotated with the same annotation scheme dates back to 2017. So it's a kind of recent event, I'd say. The first thing to note, if we are interested in UD as linguists, is that UD is could be best defined as a data set rather than a corpus. What I'm trying to say is that the tree banks in UD vary a lot as to their contents and sizes. I bring the example of Beja, Cantonese, and Greek. These tree banks differ in size a lot, as you can read. But also, if we look at the content of a few tree banks, they can be very different. So ancient Greek, the ancient Greek tree bank contains literary texts, Chakchi spoken texts, and Catalan news, for example. So very rich variety, which means that if we wanted to perform any linguistic research, probably we want to subsample, perform some kind of a subsample. In UD, we try to annotate tokens, lemmas, parts of speech, morphology, and syntax. That is the syntactic, the dependency, the relationships between tokens, and we wanted to add syntactic labels. A point which is often overlooked is that tokenization is already an annotation layer. We can have different tokenization schemes, not only because we can be interested in different linguistic kinds of annotation, for prosody, or morphosyntax, but even if we just consider one specific linguistic kind of annotation, like morphosyntax, we can have different different tokenization schemes, because this depends on how we define the syntactic word. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge, the biggest issue in UD. We actually do not really have an unambiguous definition of what a syntactic word is. We have some criteria, but as we know, it's difficult to apply those criteria to all languages consistently. So this is the first problem. A related problem is that we are allowed to split a graphic word in UD, but only rarely to merge two graphic words. This possibility about merging has been introduced with version 2, but essentially we can say that we can split words, but we cannot really merge two graphic words. And another issue is that the boundary between what a morpheme is and what a syntactic word is becomes fuzzy if we analyze different languages. A clear example is, for example, a case affix can actually correspond to a preposition in another language. I'm here showing an example of a Latin sentence where the problem of how we tokenize a graphic word arises. So the graphic word is neque, corresponding to the English nor. And in English, usually nor is treated as one token, even if we normally annotate not and as, of course, separate tokens. In Latin, we could do the same, but in this case, we would have a problem, because if we read this sentence, I'm going to translate it quickly. All troops, all Belgian troops, he saw all Belgian troops coming against him, and he knew that that the enemies were not far away. This is an abbreviated sentence. The sentence was longer. But the point here is the conjunction que, okay, depends on the verb he knew, but the negation negates the verb of a subordinate clause, or in another reading, the adverb longe. So the point here is that if we do not split this graphic word, we couldn't annotate it correctly from the perspective of the meaning, and more in general from the perspective of linguistics, okay, because the negation again the negation refers to the verb abesse. So in this case, we need to split this word, but as I said earlier, nor, for example, can be treated as one token in English. The problem about tokenization is also there for other cases, like, for example, we have in Latin, but this applies to other cases in other languages. We have a verb like amabat, he loved, and then we have amatus est, he was loved. And again, these are simply two verbs. The difference is in their tenses, okay, but they are still two verbs, but one will be one token, the other one will be two tokens, amatus and est. Similar issues is with despite versus in spite of, or bedroom, in spite of, instead versus printer cartridge, or because and so that. So essentially we have the same phenomenon, but it is treated differently as to tokenization. We know that UD address these issues syntactically, because we have specific labels which essentially are there just to mean this, that what we treat as a separate tokens essentially are one token. Okay, we have the label fixed, for example, or the label compound. But the point here is that, of course, we have here what we might define as some annotation asymmetries. The same phenomenon, but it is actually formalized in a different way. What about lemma notation? Lemma annotation is not really normativized, and there are also in this case a number of issues which arise. For example, what about substantivized adjectives? Should we use the corresponding adjective as a lemma, or should we go for the or should we treat them as a noun, and so correspondingly the lemma will be different? What about participles used as nouns? Also in this case, do we want to use the verb as a lemma, or should we choose for example, a noun like amans, amantis, if again the participle is treated in a text like a noun? What about adverbs? For example, we usually in UD consider an adverb. We can take an adverb as a lemma, but there are other sources where the lemma of an adverb is the corresponding adjective. Okay, and more in general, there are a lot of issues coming from dictionaries. We often rely on dictionaries when we try to identify lemmas, but unfortunately, dictionaries are not as consistent as we would like them to be. So as far as morphological annotation is concerned, we know that we have 17 common universal part of speech tags. We have about 24 morphological features. We can also add some language specific features just to accommodate language specific needs. Also, when it comes to morphological annotation, we can find a few issues. For example, when we have in Latin Cesare, okay, or versus cum Cesare, again, we have here the same phenomenon. We have just we have a word with a semantic role, but on the one hand, Cesare is just one token, okay, because the dative case is expressed with the word with just one token. So we have the case affix in this case. But on the other hand, if we have cum Cesare, for example, we have a preposition. So we do not have an ablative, but we have a preposition as well. So in the end, we will end up with having one token on the one hand and two tokens on the other hand, even if essentially we have a noun expressing with a semantic role associated to it. So my argument is that the underlying phenomenon is the same. And of course, this problem is still there if we consider different languages, because what we express in Latin by Cesaris can be expressed by a preposition plus a noun in another language. So we have a kind of asymmetry here as well. Another point which I think is very important to realize is that sometimes we consider morphological, okay, what is not really morphological. In Latin, neuter names could be a neuter name like bellum could be a nominative or an accusative, but this can be known only if we know the syntactic context. So without the context, we cannot decide whether it's a nominative or an accusative. But what we do is to, at the morphological layer, is to add this piece of information there. So we specify if bellum is a nominative or it is an accusative. So this is a case of what I would define as information leakage, something belonging to a different annotation layer, which is annotated in another annotation layer. By the way, this is what happens in English all the time because morphology is very poor. So it's absolute. We couldn't say if before, for example, is a conjunction or a preposition without having the syntactic context. So when we take a position, we are simply again relying on the syntactic context. What about the inventory of parts of speech? I said we try to identify universal common parts of speech, but at least some of them are really very controversial, in my opinion. What about participle? I would argue that it is that we might have a specific part of speech for participle because their morphosyntactic behavior is really peculiar. And there is another phenomenon which I call false morphosyntactic friends. I mean, sometimes when we compare languages and we try to promote parallelism, annotation parallelism, some mistake might occur. For example, my is annotated as a determiner in English, and correspondingly the mio in Italian is also in UD annotated as a determiner, even if, to be correct, they are different. They share part of the meaning, of course, but if you look at the at mio, the Italian mio, it behaves it more similar to an adjective. So we have il mio libro, my book, and then we have il grande libro, the big book, but in English, of course, we can only say my book and the big book. So just to simplify everything, the definite article is kind of included in English my, but not in Italian mio. So we have different phenomenon here, but probably because the core meaning is the same, they get the same part of speech, even if I repeat, I argue that it should be different. What about syntax? We have in UD 37 common syntactic labels, and they can also be specified if we wanted to do that. For example, a subject, we could specify that a subject is a subject of a passive verb, for example, and then we have the possibility to build a tree, a simple tree, or an enhanced tree if we wanted to be more precise with our syntactic dependencies. I see also here a few issues. For example, in my opinion, some syntactic labels look redundant. Noun subject versus clause subject. This probably we should be able to infer this distinction just relying on the syntactic tree and the morphological annotation. I will provide a few examples later. As I said earlier, essentially syntactic labels and dependencies are sometimes used to compensate tokenization issues. The distinction between core arguments and oblique is reasonable, but cross-linguistically, it's not really that consistent. So we might question its validity. And finally, there are a few phenomena which are annotated as a subordination, even if they are not subordinate structures. And the prototypical example is the annotation of coordination. Of course, I have to say that a few of these problems are not really UD specific, but rather dependency specific, dependency grammar specific. Okay, but of course, UD, since it is such a prominent project, gives us the opportunity, the possibility to reflect on this, on all of these issues. I'm giving you here just a few examples. For example, the distinction between object and oblique. In this case, we have two sentences whose meaning is the same. We discussed the problem. In Italian, we say abbiamo discusso del problema. So the only difference is that we have an object in English, but we have a prepositional phrase in Italian, and therefore the syntactic annotation will be different. What I was saying before about the redundancy of some labels, clause subject, for example, probably I argue that we might infer that subject is a clause subject because okay, it has to do with a verb. So we are speaking of a verb, both in the first and in the second sentence here. Then some of the syntactic principles, such as the primacy of a content words, are essentially dictated, as we know, by the will to make linguistic annotations as parallel as possible. Parallel, of course, cross linguistically. Okay, so that's why we have these kind of, let's say, questionable annotations, which make sense, of course, if we consider the principle of parallelism, but on linguistic grounds, they are, of course, questionable. And this applies also to the case of the annotation of the verb to be. This is another example for coordination. And so in this case, as we see, we treat the conjunct, the second verb drunk, as a dependent of the first verb. And again, this is essentially done to keep the annotation simple. And so this is also a reasonable principle, but of course this introduces linguistic analysis, which might become difficult to process, even when we try to query the tree bank. Okay, so just to conclude, I've tried to give you a few arguments about how problematic defining what a syntactic word is. Okay, and as I said earlier, I think that many other problems stem from this original problem, identifying the units for our analysis. I've tried to show you a few examples where essentially something belonging to a specific annotation layer is actually annotated in another linguistic layer, and this is done as I said, in order to accommodate a few issues / problems. First of all, problems concerning the tokenization scheme. And this is the reason why I would define UD as a kind of a hybrid system. And yeah, and of course, despite these issues, I still think that UD remains an important project because essentially gives us the possibility to reflect on all of these aspects, which otherwise I think would be much more difficult to think of, because it's just while it's just by doing essentially that you becomes aware of a number of issues. And yeah, so this is the end of my presentation. I've tried to be as quick as possible. And yeah, so if there are any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe, for a very raising a question, and also it is a very raising question presentation. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay, so may I? Okay. So yeah, since you are, annotating Latin, Greek, very inflectional and very fusional languages, I'm very interested in what you said. For example, you can also mark the case with prepositions or just with inflections. So with the inflection, the word is just one, but with preposition, you can have two words, cum caesari and so on. But I think it is. Oh yeah, this is not so balanced because it is syntactical. How should I say? It is morphologically or syntactically marked cases. In UD, you can count one or two, and they are not. How should I say? They are not fair enough. But I'm thinking that you can with this perspective, you can assess or measure the synthesis of the language. How many morphs how many morphs does the language tend to have, and so on, in one word. And also it is very interesting to measure whether Latin has more syntactic strategy to mark the case, or more morphological strategy to mark the case, and so etc. Do you have such a, do you know, does anybody have such a research?
I think that there should be some literature on this. Sometimes just phenomena are called in different ways or analyzed from a different perspective, but still you can find something which relates to your question. And but so my point here was to show that so the interesting thing is that we have essentially languages that can be inconsistent also in themselves, in the way that they encode something. And yeah, I mean, this comes as no surprise, frankly, because languages have developed over time. Okay, so they have changed, they continue to change, and essentially new strategies at a certain point emerge, and sometimes the picture that we get is not really a consistent one from all perspectives. As far as one example of this is the way semantic roles are expressed. We can just have one case, or we can have the need of a preposition in order to specify the semantic role we wanted to express. The question is then, okay, so this works if we write a language, if we speak a language. What about if we analyze a language? So should we try to come up with an annotation scheme, trying to, in a sense, address these differences, these formal differences in an efficient way, which means to give the same representation rather than as we usually do. Again, we have just one token on the one hand, but two tokens on the other hand. But again, we are just trying to annotate the same phenomenon. So probably we should come up with the same formal annotation. So yeah, this is, I think it's very interesting and more in general crucial to any linguistic formalization.
I see. Yeah, I think it is also the annotator's choice to mark the annotate in the universal dependency framework to include this inconsistency, to how to manage with these inconsistencies in the language. I'm thinking that it is also nice to have a kind of a standard to annotate the language in the UD. You also showed the very problematic case of Mio, which is also which is also marked as adjective or maybe or determiner and so on, determinative and so on. I think you pointed out that there's kind of standards or like annotator's guide to annotate the, for example, one specific language like Italian or Latin, but from the perspective of linguistic typology to compare various languages in the universal dependencies framework, I think it is also nicer to have a kind of annotator's guide for all the languages, pointing out several very problematic cases. So I think it is also very nice to raise problems or issues of the specific cases for guiding annotators to annotate their languages in the UD.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, sometimes, of course, as I said, sometimes it's easier to point out the issues and not find a solution to them, because I acknowledge that it's not that easy to find other solutions. I can think of them, but of course, then try to do this could be extremely challenging, maybe more challenging than what we are currently doing in UD. But it's always important in any case to I think be aware of this, especially, for example, if we query a tree bank. I mean, so dependencies essentially can have a different meaning. So it's not, so if we wanted to compare trees of different tree banks in UD, of course, we always have to keep in mind that not all dependencies are the same. So the meanings of those dependencies can be different. So this was just a way, and I have to say that I have kind of become more and more aware of this over time, because at the beginning it's not always easy to spot everything. I see.
Yeah, Dan.
Daniel.
Sorry, I lost last couple of sentences because I had a connection problem here, so I don't really know what you were saying before calling me.
I was just saying that that the essentially so the dependencies there are different kinds of dependencies. So for example, if we compare just the trees of different languages in UD, we should be aware that not all dependencies have the same meaning. So it really depends on what we are looking for. And yeah, and more in general, so the point was that I find UD, I would define UD as a kind of a hybrid system where the distinction between syntax and morphology is not really always very clear, but probably this is also what happens in languages as well, because as I said, sometimes you can express a semantic role with just one case, but sometimes you need a preposition. So even within the same language, you have these kind of, I would call them inconsistencies, but of course we know that this happens in languages because they have developed over time. And so they sometimes tend to make things, to simplify things. So what we could, for example, express with cases in the past, then requires maybe a preposition, because, for example, ablative in Latin at a certain point was used to express so many semantic roles that we needed a preposition in order to specify what we really wanted to say. And the question was, could we find a formalism which works less like a language, also in terms of tokenization, and so a system which is more consistent, or maybe this is not really that possible because it's simply too complex?
Well, I think it is. It is definitely quite difficult, and coincidentally, we had recently like KUDH2021 workshop about what could we possibly do in improving the treatment of word boundaries within UD and with relation to other projects. But I think it's well, for one thing, making the tokenization, especially for the case affixes versus add positions, making it more consistent, it's difficult because at the same time you want to sort of still show how the orthographical division was there. So I think if it's a language like Japanese where you don't have any word boundaries, then you can essentially decide whether you believe these are case suffixes or other postpositions. It's up to you. But if there is any orthographical tradition, then you already have to decide whether it's something you really want to diverge from the surface representation, and is it worth it? And I think that brings me to one point that I did not mention in my presentation, but in UD, we often try to stress how much you have to find a consensus by something that has been internally called the Manning's Law. And it says that the decisions in UD have to be to find a balance between various objectives that are often conflicting with each other. And one of them is to stay true to the single language, then to be also useful for linguistic typology, then to be simple enough so that people can annotate it consistently and without too many errors, and that also non-linguists can understand it, and then also to be useful for parsing with high accuracy and for downstream language understanding applications, which are more interested in semantics. And the main point here is not to list all these things, but to stress that it is usually relatively easy to come up with an improvement which would be which would improve it along one of these dimensions. But it is very challenging to stay sort of true to all of them and keep them balanced. So I think that's why we don't have any simple answer to the issues that we have raised here. And I know you are aware of it, but it's nice to have these limitations listed and at least be aware of them.
Yeah, this was my point, but you are completely right. I know that the challenge is exactly to consider all of these very often conflicting components. So essentially you cannot do justice to all of them. So you have to choose somehow. And but this, at least in my experience, has this made me reflect a lot also on the way we write languages, because the point is that in any case, of course, we rely somehow on the way we write languages. And this is also already, a translation of what we say. We put this into a written form, and this is already creates a lot of issues, and so this is of course another dimension. Yeah, I mean it's really very interesting. And in Latin, for example, I also noticed that I mentioned the case of Amatus Est. He was loved, and another extremely big problem in Latin is that very often the two tokens are not even contiguous. You can find them. So for how could we represent this? That would be very challenging. So, but this happens, and I mean this is a phenomenon. So this at least makes me go on and reflect, and yeah. So this is great. Yeah.
I think that's actually how you can interpret the dependency link. It's actually a relation, not a dependency, between Amatus and Est. Because then you can say, okay, it's ox, and it is telling me that this, in some sense, is one word, even though there might be something in between.
This is what, but still so the point was still from the I know that of course once we do this and we have specific labels, so we can essentially identify the phenomenon. So if we pay attention to this, we should be able to actually, even when we query the tree banks, we can identify those cases. My point was that still formally we can have on the one hand a dependency and a specific syntactic label, and on the other hand we might have just one token if the verb happens to be written just as one word, as in the case of Latin if we have an imperfect. So amabat is essentially like amatus est, is just that only the tense is different, but still we have two verbs. And what I was kind of questioning is that of course we could expect that the annotation is the same somehow. Either we have two tokens on the one hand and two tokens on the other hand, or we have just one token. Yeah, this is what we were saying, but they happen to be written differently. And yes, so this was the point, but I know it's not easy to find a solution for all of these issues.
I think if I can have a very quick follow-up remark on that, is that in the Dutch tool seminar, one of the proposals which I think is very interesting for future development is that we could actually have some extra layer of morphological annotation or morphology-like annotation for subtrees rather than individual words, so or in addition to the individual words. So then you could actually take two words, the verb and the auxiliary, and together for them you could say this is the past tense, while maybe none of them individually is past, but together they are the particular tense, which maybe otherwise would not exist individually in this language.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
And thank you for the interesting presentation, by the way.
Thank you so much, and for a great remark. Yeah, recently I attended a presentation by Ninja National Institute of Japanese Language and Linguistics, and they are currently developing two universal dependencies testing corpora. One is parsed by so-called tantanyi, which is short unit, short word unit or something, short unit, which is more, the unit is very close to morphs, but the other one is parsing Japanese corpus with the so-called chotanyi, which is very close to Japanese traditional unit bunsetsu, which is kind of how should I say, phrase. For example, noun phrase. Postpositional phrase like noun plus postposition. For example, content word plus function word are one unit in this the latter corpus. I think it is also nice to have a kind of how should I say, separation between, or separation, or I'm not sure, but yeah, kind of separation between content word and functional words, because functional word plus content word sometimes work like just one word, like periphrasis, like periphrastic case of a matricist, and so on. Yeah, I think this kind of layer is also, yeah, sometimes it works very functional in the for also for the linguistic typological research using, yeah, universal dependencies. Yeah, but the universal dependencies are also distinguishing the open class and closed class, right? So maybe a closed class is very close to functional words. Maybe we can use this type of yeah, this type of distinction for linguistic quantifiable research, maybe.
Well, I think we have in the documentation of universal dependencies, you will find the part of speech text clustered as open class and closed class, but it is not used anywhere formally. So I think all of us believe that if something is categorized as a noun, then the nouns are probably open class in most languages or all languages. But you're actually right that it's not always so easy to define what is a function word and what not. There is a gray area in the middle, some like small adverbials. My adverbs in general are open class, but some of them are more specifically grammaticalized. So, and it also changes with language development. So something at some point it might be a content word, and later it becomes gradually more and more just a grammatical device, and so a function word. And I think there is this what has been called like line of grammaticalization. So at every stage of language development, you will have words that are somewhere in the middle. And one issue with UD actually is that since we make such a strong division between how we annotate it, if it's function word versus content word, there will be something like what has been called the catastrophe effect, that it still looks similar to the previous instance of that phenomenon, still similar, and then all of a sudden the annotation completely changes. So obviously these catastrophes where things that look quite similar to each other have suddenly different analysis are a problem. But I think, again, that's a price that's being paid for some other improvements that we get elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, annotating UD is kind of leading to describing a language. Like it's like describing a grammar, or yeah, annotating a text is so deep, and probably we will have so many problems and issues, ambiguous cases, like yeah, grammaticalizing construction. It is a word or just a grammatical construction or just phrase or something. Yeah, there are such discussions are very occurred, raised many times also in Japanese linguistics, especially for the verb like teiru, ke. It is a progressive, but it can be parsed into two words, like verb te plus iru, yeah, it's a right verb, but some people also parse it as one word because it is in the middle of the grammaticalization. So yeah, in that case, it's so difficult. I think also, yeah, there's such cases, very ambiguous cases also in Latin and Greek annotation in the universal dependency framework. And Giuseppe, you are working on a Refusa project. How do you teach the annotators or users to annotate ambiguous cases in Latin and Greek?
Well, to be honest, I've not done this for some time now.
Okay.
But of course, it's one of the most difficult things to do because, as we are saying, essentially you need to know. So in annotation scheme, very well, you need to know a language, you need to know the annotation scheme, and there are so many cases where you simply have to take a position, but it's not that easy because the phenomenon is not clearly defined. For example, I have also, as I briefly mentioned, the problem with participles, even which, I mean, participles and the infinitives are, I mean, very difficult. We tend to classify them as verbs or as nouns slash adjectives because they can have different functions in a sentence. But the reality is that they are simply, I mean, probably they should have their own category or probably should they be analyzed in a completely different way. But this is a kind of a gradient. So it's not just about verbs and nouns or nouns and adjectives as well. I mean, there are many cases where these boundaries simply do not really work very well. And this is where I so this is where the problem is, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a general question, but we have to progress, get the answer or not the answer. But there's no truth for this kind of question. But yeah, probably we have to compromise. So yeah, especially if we do some universal things, it's very difficult to make very unit which can be applied to all the languages. Yeah, it is also very difficult to define what is a word, but it's morpheme. But we have to compromise, or we have to get we have to get to the treaty to define or to have to make rules for parsing or annotating languages. Yeah, thank you. And does anybody have any questions? Or yeah, Amano Sensei, I think you also mentioned the very interesting cases of ambiguity and the different annotations by different annotators. Do you have something to say in your mind?
Yeah, there are many cases for the so possible many interpretation. I have no idea about that in moment, but so we will discuss and have yeah. So and deepen the understanding. Sorry, I have no idea for that, but.
Yeah, probably you will, probably in the progress of your project, probably you will have so many such cases, maybe to create the Vedic corpus. But we probably it's nice to have just record these cases and make a kind of guideline to pass these problematic cases, I think.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody have any questions? We are quite behind the time. Okay, so if you have any questions or remarks to all the presenters today, who are here now, please raise your hand or just type your questions or just unmute yourself. Oh, nothing. All right. So yeah, thank you so much for Giuseppe for a very, very thought-provoking presentation and very, yeah, knowledgeful lecture. Thank you so much, Giuseppe.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the conference.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so this is our last day. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Yeah, it's very sad. It's not sad, but it's very unfortunate that we cannot do it on site at the Kyoto University. And yeah, if we could, we could guide you in throughout the city of Kyoto, which is the ancient capital of Japan for 1,000 years, and there are so many sightseeing places, spots, temples, Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, and so on. But someday we would like to invite you all to Kyoto and enjoy this city and have great discussions. And thank you so much, everyone, for great discussions and lectures. We're so happy to have your lectures and also your questions and also discussions. Yeah, thank you. Professor Kita, do you have a closing remark?
Not really, but I was so impressed that the international community, research community of UD is such a large community, and the discussions deepened the methodology and tool itself. It was so impressive. Thank you for presenters. I was really enjoying the talks. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kita-sensei. And thank you so much, everyone who participated in this conference. We will publish the video on the official platform someday. But yeah, thank you so much. And if you have any questions later coming up, please write emails to the presenters or just give us your email, and we will forward them to the presenters. Also, thank you so much, and thank you so much, and have a great day, have a great evening, and have a great morning, maybe someday, some people in the United States. So thank you so much for coming, and see you in Kyoto. Maybe we will have a hybrid conference for everyone to participate. Yeah, thank you so much, and have a good day. Thank you.